Hi, welcome back. We're after yesterday. You may remember that as the video ended, we were fighting with the carburetors, and after we completed the video, I kept going for another hour or two, and I could not get this thing to run right. And then I remembered, when you're dealing with these carburetors, first you got to make sure everything in the ignition system was okay. And while we did clean the plugs and take a look at the wires, we hadn't done the rest of the homework. So I started the day by going through and using a timing light, checked each of the ignition leads with the engine running set up as rough as it was. And all the wires were good, everything was firing. I then loosened all of these spark plug leads so that you could pull them on and off easily. And using a set of insulated pliers, pulled the plug leads one at a time until I did find a bad plug. And that was on number 3, right in here. One plug is bad enough, so rather than mess around, I had a spare set of Bosch plugs kicking around, a used set that were cleaned and put away. So I installed them, rehooked up the wires, fired it up, and it ran well enough that it would hold an idle. At that point, we put the timing light on, checked the timing. It was 8 degrees retarded from the factory setting. So after getting the distributor unstuck, because it hadn't been touched in so long, it was seized to the base. We set the timing to factory spec, and it ran a little bit better. So then it was time to get to the carburetors. Now the carburetors were badly messed up, and you couldn't get a balance out of them. We were having all kinds of problems, tearing our hair out. So it was time to take radical steps. And we pulled the intake manifold and carbs from one of the spare engines that we knew was good. And we were going to change the whole setup to get to a decent baseline. But we decided not to. And let me show you why. As we were cleaning up the intake manifold and the carburetors to get them ready to install, noticed a couple things. One was under here, where you can see the pointer, there's a vacuum port that was completely unplugged. Nothing was attached to it, was wide open. And on my 1976, there are no vacuum ports on that bottom edge. So I went and reached underneath the existing carburetors on the convertible, and sure enough, there was no plug covering it at all. So we had a major vacuum leak. We rerouted vacuum lines, got it hooked up properly, discovered looking in the book that that was supposed to be for the vacuum advance. So we hooked the vacuum advance to it and did a shuffle, got some other things in the vacuum side fixed, and it ran a little better still. Now that we had no vacuum leaks, we knew the ignition was good, and we knew it was set up properly, we started to try and balance the carbs. And we started by ear, adjusting this screw and this screw. These two screws are used to sync up the carburetors or get them to work together properly. And by ear, we got it fairly close. It was running a lot better, which made me quite happy. It had hold and idle at 1500 RPM. Wasn't the smoothest, but it'd do it. And then we took the next step, which was listening to the Venturis to get them balanced even more. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. Now normally, to balance the two carburetors, I use a Unisync, which is a device that goes on right here. You just hold it on with your hand, and it gives you a reading on the Unisync that tells you how much air the carburetor is moving, and you just move it from one to the other until you get them balanced. Now I had lent out my Unisync. The guy who has it I couldn't reach, so I had to take another measure, and what we did was we used a chunk of hose. Now, to make this work, what you do is you put the hose right into the carb throat, like so, and you listen at this end. Then you take it out, put it in this one, and you listen again. And you keep adjusting these two screws until the sound out of here is the same out of both. So we mucked with that for a considerable period of time, back and forth, up and down, and got it to the point where they were both equal. Now the engine was running a lot smoother. Then by backing off these screws, this one and this one over here, each a half a turn at the time, we brought the idle down to 1,000 RPM, smooth, everything worked well. At that point, we were as close as we're going to get until I get my Unisync back. We checked everything, tightened it up, fired it back up, and cracked the throttle. Totally different engine. The little TR7, as you'll hear in a minute, popped and snapped and ran really nice, pulling up to 6,000 RPM in just a blink. Everything worked well, and it's now idling at 1,000 RPM, tremendously drivable, nice little car. When we started this exercise, it wouldn't pull over 4,500 RPM when you drove it, didn't want to idle, didn't want to start. It was not a happy little engine, and especially considering the carburetors were not built that long ago. Now, I'm not happy with the shop that did it. I'm not going to mention them or where they are, but they're a shop that specializes in muscle cars and hot rods. And I think what most likely happened is they figured they could handle it, got into it, didn't have the expertise, somebody got a little sloppy and left some messes behind that we got to clean up. But now it's a nice running little engine. It's a little snarler. On the test drive, we were able to pull 6,000 RPM in every gear, except fifth, of course. She'll give you a nice sharp chirp when you're rolling along at almost zero and smack the gas. She's running really, really well. So let's go listen to how well it does run. So there we go. She's running nicely, much, much smoother, 1,000 RPM idle, and when you snap on it, she's right there. So we have her back to stock specifications, everything set to factory. The only piece we're currently missing is the hose that runs from here to the exhaust manifold heat stove. And I'll be picking that up tomorrow. It's just 4 feet of 1 3/4 inch heat stove tubing. And then this engine bay is done. We've defeated all of the mechanical problems. The rest of the car, as you know by following the series, we've been through, we've taken care of all the big deals, we've checked things over. She's a nice solid little piece, and now we're going to go into finishing some of the small problems like loose interior lights and things like that, the really niggly stuff. We're going to come back, we're going to detail the engine bay. I've soaked it in some areas in the engine bay, once again in engine cleaner, so that we can get this dealt with and get it handled and make it look good. But as we go through in detail, we'll cover the important stuff. But right now, we've got a nice little TR7. Took it for a drive with the top down today. And it is just a pleasure to drive. Lots of snap. Runs beautifully. We're just about there on this project. So, until next time, have a great weekend. Hit like, notify, and subscribe if you're enjoying our series. And stay in touch. We'll be back soon.